Hello and welcome to Power Culture Coco, home of the Coco. I have ideas, and most of those ideas are about dismantling patriarchal myths to heal our wounds of dehumanization and obedience to irrational authority. Today, we're debunking myths that say emotional and relational skills are resources embodied by women, not skills that men can cultivate for their own selves because they're just not wired that way, or the boy Bible says they shouldn't have to. These kind of myths are dangerous because they enable men's learned helplessness, that they cannot meet their own needs independently, let alone contribute to the well-being of someone else. And this habitual attunement to what men are not receiving for free from women fuels red pill grievances and Christian nationalist arguments that women's independence is a direct threat to men's survival. From that mindset, they're justifying stripping women of all rights to ensure that every man, no matter who or what he is entitled by birthright to own and use a woman as his private for-profit property. And that's the crux of this pitch from Christian nationalists to repeal women's voting rights in favor of a household vote. Preach.
So let us talk about women voting, shall we? Back in the bad old days, before the 19th Amendment, the men were considered to be the heads of their households and represented their families at the ballot box. So what happened when their wives were granted suffrage? Let us take a typical presidential election to illustrate it, using the first one in 1920 after women's suffrage was accomplished, the election between Warren Harding and James Cox. If both the husband and wife vote for Harding, say, then what you have done is simply multiply the number of total votes cast for him by 2. And if the husband votes for Harding, say, and the wife votes for Cox, then what you've done is cancel out the voice of that particular household. Upon discovering how they were each going to vote, what would be the harm if the two of them just stayed home for a quiet dinner together in order to cancel out one another's vote that way? Where was the great progress supposed to be located? The net effect of women's suffrage was not an advance in women's rights, but rather part of a push to replace covenanted entities, like families, with raw individualism. An overweening state greatly prefers governing an atomistic populace, where each individual is like a BB thrown into an electoral sack. There's no structural rigidity to it, especially after laxity in the law concerning porn, pot, and poker has now greased all the BBs. Nothing coheres anymore. In the older system, the people were grouped in molecules, Burke's little platoons, some of them quite complex, and molecular societies are much more capable of resisting the demands of statism. So the suffrage movement was actually not taking up the cause of women, but rather was part of a long-sustained war on the family. The nadir of this kind of thinking says that a decision to abort a child is a decision between a woman and her doctor. The father of the child is stripped of any legal ability to protect the life of his own legitimate child. We need to retrace all of our steps in order to discover how a travesty like that could ever happen. And when we do, we discover that a lot of it started at Seneca Falls.
I think the 19th Amendment should be repealed. I think that because, well, first and foremost, because I'm a Christian, and that is the Christian position. Oh my gosh, you're saying that? Yes, that is the Christian position, is that households should not be divided against one another. So it's not just elevating a male vote, but it's elevating the household vote. We're saying that that society, if you break it down to the basic building block, is not atomistic as individuals, but molecular, being households. The way that God sees humanity is He breaks them down to families, and so that it's not just random individual atoms all bouncing around together, and 350 million atoms bouncing together in one nation, on one piece of land, but it's families. And so by repealing the 19th Amendment, just for the record, it's not just trying to take away a female vote, but it's trying to say, no, there's a family vote. Right. There's a household. And it's like, well, where do women get their voice? Where women get their voice is from their father, from their husband. If they're not married, it's from their father. If they're not married and their father is dead, it's from their brother, it's from their uncle, it's the men in their lives that love them.
So household voting is obviously a euphemism for using authoritarian state violence to force women into mandatory marriage. And that actually reminded me of this insight from psychologist Eric Fromm. Quote, "The authoritarian character has not reached maturity. He can neither love nor make use of reason. As a result, he is extremely alone, which means that he is gripped by a deeply rooted fear. He needs to feel a bond, which requires neither love nor reason, and he finds it in the symbiotic relationship, in feeling one with others, not by reserving his own identity, but rather by fusing, by destroying his own identity. The authoritarian character needs another person to fuse with because he cannot endure his own aloneness and fear. Patriarchal men cannot endure their own aloneness and fear because they killed off the emotional parts of themselves during their initiation from boyhood into patriarchal masculinity. We talked about that initiation process in detail in part 1. I linked it in the description if you're interested. But since patriarchal masculinity is defined by how it is not feminine, this leaves patriarchal men dependent on harvesting all emotional needs from women. Which is a lot, right? Because life is an inherently emotional experience. And so this basically includes all cooperative skills related to caring for oneself and others, plus the practical knowledge and labor associated. And from this space of conditioned lack and emotional arrestment, men tend to conflate sex with emotional regulation. And that is the first and most desperate resource that patriarchal men want to extract from women. Sexually using a woman to regulate his own emotional state and to experience a bond which requires neither love nor reason to escape his own aloneness and fear. And that's addiction, not the co-creation of intimacy and pleasure. And I'm not saying that sexual desire isn't real. I'm saying that the undeveloped emotional parts that men kill off do still live within them. They're just repressed, neglected, and shoved under the rug of, I just need sex. So many men register emotional discomfort in their bodies as sexual urges, not emotions that need to be processed and released. Some men do recognize emotional discomfort for what it is, but still feel that the only masculine way to release it is sexual. To pump and dump that energy into a woman to avoid the work of processing it themselves. Like, they prefer to use women's bodies to launder grief, rage, frustration, insecurity, whatever emotions. They want to launder it all through horny agitation instead of dealing with it within themselves. Emotions live in the body, not the mind. And straight up, I did not learn this and start to practice emotional regulation skills until I was in my 30s. So I am not out here preaching from some high mountaintop. I am talking from the trenches that I had to teach myself out of, because literally any person is capable of learning and implementing these skills. We're talking about journaling, breath work, somatic practices, stretching, dancing, rage screaming into pillows, right? Whatever it takes to consciously identify and process your emotions and then physically move that energy out of your body. And real talk, initiating these skills radically changed my freaking life, all right? They are very transformative, if kind of boring to master. But my main point is emotional regulation are skills. And it's challenging when you're not taught as a kid, but as adults, we all have the resources and initiative to master them ourselves. And that's the important work, right? That's the important work. Because this emotional bypassing through sex addiction is super problematic, especially in the age of digital porn. Too many boys gain access to pornography at way too young of an age, and then they learn to exclusively rely on self-servicing and consuming the degradation of women to cope with all of their feelings. They feel bored, watch porn. They feel sad, watch porn. Angry, watch porn. Oh, you're feeling socially insecure? Degrade the girls around you to boost your own ego and bond with the other boys. Like, it goes that deep. And a part of me can relate because I have to stop myself multiple times every day from numbing out scrolling on TikTok. Like, true story, right? But porn addictions have violent real-world consequences in a way that dog videos just don't. Plus, they're conditioning and actively wiring their brains to perceive emotional stability and just like feeling baseline positivity in their own bodies as a result of using and degrading girls and women. And that's not even to touch on the truly disturbing content that is most popular on these sites, right? Stepfamily relations and hentai are the two most searched pornography categories. If you're unfamiliar, hentai is a cartoon style porn, right? Anime style. And the female characters look like little girls, like little girls. But in the description, they say it's actually a 500-year-old spirit in a little girl's body. So it's okay. And the themes in this, super disturbing, super violent, And considering this in the context of what we're talking about, too many men are actively wiring their brains and bodies to feel good from seeing little girls and women being violently violated. That's not good. So if men want to talk about biological wiring, that is the only conversation we should be having with them. Anyway, this dependence on bypassing creates a palpable desperation for sex. And we've culturally normalized men behaving like addicts to the point that they openly claim that desiring women is a form of male exploitation. So this is a very standard comment I get whenever I post my content on Reddit, right? Worldwide, females profit over $100 billion by exploiting the sexual needs of men. My guy, no one is forcing anyone to subscribe to OnlyFans. He's acting like OnlyFans models are busting into his apartment like the freaking Kool-Aid man, putting a Glock to his temple and making an offer he can't refuse. Subscribe or die. I haven't heard of that happening ever. If you have, let me know. Let me know. Because I'd want to send her flowers. That's pretty badass. In this economy... But this idea that men are exploited by desiring women is repeated in countless media targeted towards men. So this is from a Substack article about why men need sex from women. Brace yourselves. Quote, women have now commoditized sex to gain attention and money from men, and men have been freed of the relational commitment that was required for them to have access to sex. Prostitution and pornography have been destigmatized. There's a new class of young female millionaires raking in cash through their OnlyFans accounts, while many of the men who pay for access make a fraction of the income. We're a long way from the Scarlet Letter. And all of this serves to reframe sex as an exciting recreational activity that is essentially a luxury good. Enjoyable and desirable, but ultimately negotiable and non-essential. Oof, the contempt. Love the Scarlet Letter call out. If you're unfamiliar, in that novel, a young woman becomes pregnant outside of wedlock and she is exiled by her community and forced to wear a scarlet A. It turns out that the preacher who led her exiling was the baby daddy. He's very upset that we do not have Scarlet Letter going on. Or maybe he didn't read it, I don't know. So, men are not entitled to sex. Point blank, period. Consent is king, always. And it's just really funny to hear him complain like this, because women's sexual pleasure has always, at best, been treated as a non-essential luxury. If not completely erased as a myth, right? We define sex by what men like most. And what many women like the best and gets them there is considered optional foreplay. So we literally define sex by men's pleasure, not women's. But now that women are not forced to sexually please a man to access resources necessary to survive, men are being exploited. Left, right, and center. So much exploitation. I'm proud of us, ladies. I'm proud of us. Really turning the tables here. But let's talk about the OnlyFans exploitation for a second. So to be clear, the top 1% of OnlyFans models make a lot of money. But it's estimated that 75% of OnlyFans models make less than $150 a month. So I don't know what class of young nouveau riche sex workers he's freaking referring to. But I do know that 84 million American men subscribe to OnlyFans, which is about half of the adult male population. In comparison, about 1 million American women do. But somehow, men's choice to subscribe to OnlyFans is exploitation. And these same men had no problem with porn produced, distributed, and sold by men. No problem with Hustler magazine or Girls Gone Wild, where men profited from degrading women and women did not. But a woman owning her sexuality and demanding reciprocity, whether that's relational or transactional, well, that's exploitation for men. And to be clear, these men do not care about their rank hypocrisy, right? Because patriarchy promised them that by annihilating their own identity to fuse with and perform patriarchal masculinity, that they would be rewarded with a woman being forced to do the same for him. He would be rewarded with a woman who would annihilate herself to cease to have masculine, independent needs and desires, and she would fuse into him as his submissive appendage, the same way he destroyed his own self to function as the submissive appendage of patriarchal masculinity. And listen, I am not anti-sex, but I am anti-sex to avoid emotionally maturing, right? Because seeing sex as emotional regulation is the gateway to believing that all social and relational skills are commodities embodied by women that men must be able to use. That's why some red pill men will claim that they cannot create social bonds themselves. They need a woman to do that work for them because independent emotional regulation is a prerequisite for building connections. Connecting with others requires empathy. Empathy requires being able to feel your own feelings first before you can perceive and care about somebody else's. Empathy is required to master skills of friendship, partnership, kinship, and community building. Relying on sex as a catch-all for emotional processing prevents men from developing relational skills. So then they claim that all human connection and intimacy are being gate-kept away from them by women. All of these grievances fuel red pill and Christian nationalist narratives that women are maliciously and selfishly withholding the resources that men need to survive, and that justifies using state-sponsored violence to enslave women. So I'm going to wrap it there. Woof, what a doozy. What a doozy. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe for weekly videos. And drop a line in the comments. Do you have any tips and tricks for dealing with emotional overwhelm and kind of getting back grounded? I'd love to hear them. And, maybe I'll make a video about some of mine. Let me know if you'd like that. But thank you so much. I'm over on TikTok at Coco Has Ideas. And you can always check out my free writing at powerculturecoco.substack.com. I'll see you guys next time.